Man, what a stacked cast. The Netflix original movie, The Devil All the Time, brings together a huge list of names for this period crime drama. Are the actors enough, or is there a story there too? In between small towns in the Midwest, the lives of many people intersect through brutality and corruption. The film has an unseen narrator who tells the story of the lives of Willard, played by Bill Skarsgard, and Arvin, played by Tom Holland. Now, the story begins before Tom Holland's Arvin is born, but it builds all of the circumstances in which his life is going to be framed. Bill Skarsgard and Haley Bennet play his parents. They're semi-poor, but they're really hard-working. They're living in a small cabin-ish house in the woods in really a very small town. And the setting is post-World War II. Skarsgard as Willard is semi-religious and has a deep conviction for justice, or at least how he sees justice. The first portion of the film is dedicated to him, so we get to learn just about what makes him tick, see some of his background, how he comes into this town, how he even meets Haley Bennet. They have a son, Arvin, and that's who grows up to then be Tom Holland's Arvin, but we get to see them interact, and it really, as a young boy, you get to see how Arvin is shaped through the words and the actions of his dad. Now, Tom Holland as Arvin is great to see him outside of his Peter Parker role, which we've seen him most recently in. He's angry, but justifiably so in a lot of circumstances, and when he sees injustice, he acts upon it. The story reminds me a bit of a Tarantino film. You have these multiple events going on independently, and then at some point they all converge for chaos and blood. There are so many good performances in this, each of them with their own dark dimension. Robert Pattinson plays a young preacher who has hubris wrapped up in his religiosity. From the trailer, I thought that he was going to play more of a prominent role. Now, his part is pivotal in certain points, actually in one very important part, but he doesn't have the larger role that I thought he was going to have. Jason Clarke and Riley Keough are a married couple who are pretty twisted and have a penchant for photography. Sebastian Stan is a sheriff, and he is really just bent on getting reelected to his position. And we get to see how that affects his motivations and what he's willing to do to maintain his status. Henry Melling is a crazy-eyed fire and brimstone preacher. I mean, he's exactly the person that you would expect to find in some small-time backwoods country church just out in the sticks someplace. And he really will make your skin crawl. And then there's a scene with him that will absolutely make your skin crawl. This is a patient movie. Now, I wasn't bored with it at all, but I can see how some people might find it slow. I found myself drawn to each of the characters, even if I couldn't relate to any of them. And to top that off, I didn't like most of them either. As the movie goes about, I was really trying to figure out if there were any redeeming characters to the story. There's a few minor characters who are decent people, but they're not really the crux of anything. I mean, they're there to influence people minorly, but on the whole, they don't serve much of an impact. Ultimately, I think the character of Arvin is somebody that you could hold up to be decent, or at least redeemable. He's a very flawed character, but he's working with what he's got. I mean, he's trying to reconcile everything that he knows and put that in line with how he sees justice and how to deal with injustices. His conflict of trying to be a good guy while being engulfed by bad situations is really fun to watch. I mean, he pulls off the character so well. It was very refreshing to see Tom Holland in kind of this gritty role. The weakest part of the film, I think, is that the characters, aside from Willard and Arvin, aren't that fleshed out. I mean, we do get enough to see why they're bad or sinister, but when you really dive into each of the characters, there's not a lot of backstory to them. There's not a whole lot of depth that really just can draw you into understand a lot of their motivations. I would have loved to have seen each of the characters get their own segment of the film, to really dive into those characters and their motivations, but it also gives the actors even more time to shine. But with what we get, we end up having a shallow look at a bunch of people who do bad things. Bill Skarsgård and Tom Holland are really the only ones that get really good development into their characters. Now, I understand that to focus on each segment would have just made this film impossibly long. I mean, it probably would have been pushing 4 hours or more. I think had they done this as maybe a limited series, that would have been cool to watch because you could still have the overarching story of Willard and then into Arvin and see how they all intersect and connect, but you get to have more depth on each of these bad people. And I mean, each of them are rich enough as characters to have a lot of time devoted to them. And you could really, I mean, like I said, a limited series would have been cool to watch. As it is, though, I mean, I do enjoy the villains. I like seeing them. I just wanted to have more understanding of what pushed them to be as bad as they are. The setting for the whole film really does transport you into the late 40s and then on into the early 60s. And the small mountainous towns are secluded and backwoodsy, and just you feel some oppression and some isolation by being there. I mean, also with that isolation, there's a loneliness to it, and also this sense that you could pretty much disappear in one of those areas and nobody would even miss you. And more so, the people that did know that you went missing, they may not say anything because they're pretty tight-lipped about things that go on in the woods. This film is filled with tragedy and really could leave you in a depressed state. But the acting is wonderful. I mean, I really did enjoy the story, especially because it's carried along by Tom Holland. I mean, him portraying Arvin through the last half of the film at least is just outstanding to watch. And despite the lack of development on some of the characters, I still had a fun time with this. There's sex, nudity, a lot of profanity, and some brutal violence. I give The Devil All the Time 4 out of 5 couches. Have you been looking forward to seeing this one? Have you watched it already? I'd love to know what you thought of the film and of the cast in the comments below. If you enjoyed this review, please give it a like. Also, don't forget to share and subscribe. I'm Chris. This is Movies and Munchies. Thanks for couching with me.